3 days after my parents were buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery, while the white flowers on their graves had not even had time to wither, my older sister walked into the old house with several cardboard boxes in her hands and told me to find somewhere else to die. I still remember the sound of those boxes dropping onto the living room floor. It was not loud, but in a house that had just gone through a funeral, the noise landed dry and sharp, like a door being slammed in my face. The unopened sympathy cards were still on the table. In the kitchen, the mug my mother always used was still sitting beside the sink, as if she had only stepped out into the garden. And I stood in the middle of the room, one hand gripping my cane, trying to understand whether the woman in front of me was truly my sister. Vanessa was wearing a cream-colored coat, her face frighteningly calm. Her husband Nathan stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. No one asked whether I had eaten. No one asked whether I had slept the night before. No one even mentioned our parents. "You need to pack," Vanessa said. "This house is no longer for you." I looked at the cardboard boxes by my feet. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa exhaled as if I were an inconvenient meeting. "I've spoken to the lawyer. Everything belongs to me. The house, the accounts, our parents' assets. You have 2 weeks to find somewhere else." I heard every word, but it took a few seconds for them to truly reach me. Outside the window, my mother's garden sat still in the cold March sunlight. I had lived in this house for the past 2 years, not because I was lazy, but because after the accident it was the only place where I could recover. If you have ever been dismissed by your own family when you were at your weakest comment, I understand. And if you want to hear this story all the way to the final twist, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next part. I tried to keep my voice from shaking. "Vanessa, Mom and Dad just died. I need time." She looked at the cane in my hand. There was no pity in her eyes. No grief either. Only cold irritation, as if I had ruined her plan. "You've had more than enough time, Amelia," she said. 2 years is long enough to play the victim. Nathan said her name, but Vanessa did not stop. She stepped closer, her sharp perfume covering the scent of funeral flowers. "I can't let you rot here forever," she said. "Find somewhere else to die." At that moment, the most painful thing was not that I had no money or that I did not know where I would go. The most painful thing was realizing that to Vanessa, I was no longer her sister. I was just a broken object that needed to be removed from the house before the buyers arrived. Before I became the woman standing frozen in the living room with a cane in my hand, I once had a life I truly believed nothing could destroy. My name is Amelia Carter. At 32, I ran a small landscape design company in Hartford. I was not wealthy in the way Vanessa always dreamed of becoming, but I was proud of every dollar I earned. I designed gardens for historic homes, renovated backyards for young families, and sometimes took on projects restoring old public grounds for the city. I loved the feeling of standing before an empty piece of land, seeing weeds, broken stones, and dry soil, then imagining a brick path climbing roses and a wooden bench beneath a maple tree. I thought my life would grow that way, slowly but steadily. One drawing, one garden, one blooming season at a time. Then on a Friday evening in late autumn, everything ended at an intersection. I do not remember the crash. I do not remember the shattering glass. I do not remember the car spinning before it slammed into a lamppost. Later, the police said the other man had been drunk, had run a red light, and had been driving far too fast. They said I was lucky to be alive. But during those first months, I was not sure whether that was luck at all. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I saw was the white ceiling and the cold lights above me. My back hurt so badly that every breath felt as if someone were pulling steel wires through my spine. The doctor stood beside my bed, his voice slow and careful. He said the surgery had lasted 11 hours. He said they had placed metal in my spine. He said I might never walk normally again. I heard all of it, but I did not cry right away. I only looked at my legs beneath the blanket and waited for them to move. They did not move. In the days that followed, my life shrank to the size of a hospital room. I went from being someone who used to walk across job sites all day to someone who had to learn how to sit up without fainting. I went from driving myself to client meetings to needing a nurse to lift me into a wheelchair. The smallest tasks became humiliating negotiations with my own body. My company lost clients. Projects were canceled. My last employee resigned. My savings drained away like water while medical bills arrived more reliably than anyone's visits. My parents brought me home on a rainy afternoon. My father built a ramp behind the porch. My mother changed the sheets in the downstairs living room and placed a vase of flowers by the window. She held my hand and told me I did not have to carry this alone. I believed her. But I did not know that the same room where I began learning how to live again would also be the room where 2 years later, Vanessa would tell me to leave as if I no longer had any value. During the first months I stayed at my parents' house, I lived in the downstairs room that looked out over the back garden. It had once been my mother's reading room. She moved the old bookshelves into the dining room, placed a hospital bed beside the window, and hung thin curtains so the morning sunlight would not shine directly into my eyes. Whenever I woke up, I often heard my father outside on the porch, the sound of his hammer striking wood as he adjusted the wheelchair ramp, and my mother in the kitchen softly singing an old song, whose ending she always forgot. I hated feeling as though I had become the center of all that care. I hated watching my father bend down to lock the wheels of my chair. I hated seeing my mother hide her sighs as she counted out my medication. But they never made me feel like a burden. My father always said, "This house was built so you could come back whenever you needed to." My mother would simply place her hand on my shoulder warm and steady, as if she could keep me from falling all the way down. Meanwhile, Vanessa called once a month, sometimes even less. Her calls were always short, always rushed, always with the sound of traffic or some expensive cafe in the background. If my mother answered, Vanessa would talk about her daughter's piano lessons, her son's soccer games, a vacation in Nantucket, or how Nathan had just met someone important in the investment world. If I answered, her first response was usually a faint silence, followed by a question that felt like a needle. "Oh, you're still there. Put Mom on the phone." Still there. As if I were a stain on the carpet that the family had tried to clean but could never fully remove. As if my presence in my childhood home was an irritation that needed to be pointed out again and again. But what Vanessa did not know was that the house was not only keeping me alive, I was also helping my parents stay upright. After a few months when I could push my wheelchair into the kitchen on my own, I began making soup for my mother on the days her joints hurt. When my father forgot to take his blood pressure medicine, I was the one who reminded him. I read their mail, paid the bills, wrote down their medical appointments, and sat with my mother on the nights when back pain kept her from sleeping. Then little by little, I learned how to stand again. First with both hands gripping the rail. Then with a walker. Then with a black cane my father bought for me, its dark wooden handle, smooth as though it had been waiting for me for a long time. 4 months before my parents died, I walked from the living room to the back porch without anyone holding me up. My mother cried. My father turned his face away and pretended to clean his glasses. And for the first time in a very long while, I believed I was not finished. But in Vanessa's eyes, I was still only the broken younger sister taking up a room. The last Christmas before my parents died, Vanessa came home with her whole family, in a rush of cold wind and expensive perfume. She stepped through the door as if this house were a small hotel she had booked in advance, handed her coat to my mother, told Nathan to carry the gifts into the living room, and called for her 2 children to run in and greet their grandparents. Emma wore a red dress with a velvet bow in her hair. Jack wore a blue sweater and held a handheld game console. They were lovely children, but under Vanessa's direction, everything around them always had to be perfect. The gifts had to be placed at exactly the right angle under the Christmas tree. The tablecloth had to lie perfectly straight. The porcelain plates had to be the set my mother only used for special occasions. Even the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen was criticized for being a little too strong. I had spent almost the entire previous day preparing the foods the children liked. Mac and cheese for Jack, chocolate chip. Pancakes for Emma, mashed potatoes for Nathan, and the apple pie my mother used to make, every year at the end of the season. I stood in the kitchen with my cane leaning against the counter, my back burning, as if fire were running along my spine, and still I kept going. Not because I expected praise, only because I wanted to feel useful in this house. Vanessa walked into the kitchen, watched me stir the cheese sauce, and curled her lip. "You do not have to try so hard, Amelia. No one expects you to be a hero." I lowered my head and turned off the stove, pretending I had not heard her. My mother stood behind Vanessa with a dish towel in her hand, and her expression fell. My father was by the doorway, just about to step in. Then he stopped. I could tell he had heard it. But as in so many moments before, he said nothing. At the time, I thought his silence was avoidance. Only much later did I understand that he was remembering. On Christmas morning, the whole family gathered in the living room for the traditional photograph. My father set the camera on a tripod. My mother adjusted the silver ornament on the tree. Emma and Jack laughed beneath the warm yellow lights. I stood beside the sofa, holding my cane, wearing the pale blue sweater my mother had chosen for me the night before. Vanessa looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. It was not the smile of a sister. It was the smile of someone preparing to cut an unnecessary detail out of a painting. "Amelia," she said gently, "maybe you should sit this one out." I thought I had heard her wrong. "What?" "It is only the Christmas card photo," she replied. "I just want it to look a little neater. Your cane does not really fit." The room fell completely silent. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. Nathan looked down at his phone. The children stopped laughing. My father stood behind the camera, one hand resting on the shutter button, and his eyes darkened. I could have reacted. I could have said that I was a daughter in this house. I could have asked why a cane was more shameful than cruelty. But I was too tired to turn my mother's last Christmas into an argument. So I smiled, nodded, and walked into the kitchen. Through the glass door, I watched them stand close together in front of the tree. My father pressed the shutter. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each click sounded like confirmation that I had been erased from my own family. I did not know that the next morning my father drove to the office of lawyer Benjamin Whitaker. I knew even less that the photograph without me would become the reason everything changed. My parents died on a Tuesday morning in March, just as the rose bushes behind the house were beginning to show their first tender shoots. That day I was out in the garden. The ground was still damp from the rain the night before, and the smell of cold soil mixed with rotting leaves reminded me of old springs, when my mother used to say that plants always knew how to come back to life no matter how long winter had been. I was sitting on the wooden bench my father had placed beneath the trellis, my cane leaning beside me holding a pair of shears. As I trimmed the dry rose branches, my mother no longer had the strength to tend. Then my phone rang in my coat pocket. I do not know why, but before I even saw the unknown number on the screen, my heart sank. Some calls do not need to be answered for a person to know that their life is about to be cut in half. The man on the other end spoke very slowly. He asked if I was Amelia Carter. He said the plane carrying my parents had suffered an incident on its way to California for an old friend's wedding. He used words that were very polite and very careful, but I only heard them in broken pieces. Accident. No survivors. We are very sorry. The shears slipped from my hand. I did not scream. I did not cry right away either. I only stared at the rosebush in front of me at one small bud, just beginning to show a deep red color, and thought the most foolish thing, that my mother had not lived long enough to see it bloom. After that, everything moved like a room filling with water. Vanessa flew back that same evening. She walked into the house with her phone in her hand, her voice dry and fast, and immediately took over everything. Which funeral home? What color the flowers should be? How the obituary should be written? Who would be invited? Who would sit in the front row? She decided it all with the precision of someone planning a charity gala, not a funeral for her own parents. I was too numb to object. Every time I tried to say that my mother had loved lilacs more than white lilies, Vanessa brushed me aside. This is not the time to be sentimental, Amelia. But what could be more sentimental than burying the people who had given you life? On the day of the funeral, I sat in the front row with my cane laid across my knees. Vanessa stood beside the coffin, greeting guests like the perfect hostess. People hugged her, praised her for being strong, praised her for being thoughtful. Many of them did not even know I was Henry and Margaret Carter's younger daughter. They looked at me as though I were a sick, distant relative who had been brought there out of obligation. I lost my parents on that Tuesday morning. But throughout the funeral, I felt as though I was losing something else, too. My place in the family. 3 days later, that feeling became the truth. 3 days after the funeral, Vanessa found me in my mother's old reading room. I was sitting among the sympathy cards, opening one envelope after another, then setting them back down, because every time I saw my parents' names written in black ink, my throat closed up. She did not sit down. Vanessa had never liked being in rooms she could not control. She stood in the doorway, with her arms folded across her chest, her diamond ring flashing under the warm yellow light. I spoke to the lawyer, she said. I looked up. What lawyer? Our parents' lawyer. Vanessa answered far too quickly. He confirmed that everything belongs to me. The house, the accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it. For one small moment, her words did not fit with my memory. My parents had worked with Benjamin Whittaker for more than 20 years. My father used to joke that Benjamin knew the Carter family's financial history better than anyone in the family did. If Vanessa had truly spoken to him, she would have used his name. She would have said Benjamin, or at least Mr. Whittaker. But she only said the lawyer as if she were trying to cover a blank space with confidence. Did he give you a copy of the will? I asked. Vanessa's eyes stalled for less than a second. You do not need to see it. I'm their daughter. You are someone who has been living off them in their house, she corrected, her voice turning cold. And now that house belongs to me? I stared at her for a long time. The sentence hurt, but it also woke me up. Vanessa was not grieving. She was rushing. Rushing to sell, rushing to divide, rushing to turn our parents' deaths into an inventory of assets. That night, when the only sounds in the house were the ticking wall clock and the wind tapping lightly against the glass doors, I went into my father's study. His desk still carried the smell of old wood and pipe tobacco, even though he had quit smoking years ago. I opened drawer after drawer, not knowing exactly what I was looking for. A document. A piece of proof that I had not lost my mind. In the bottom drawer, beneath old tax files and faded family photographs, I found a business card. Benjamin Whittaker, estate attorney. I turned it over. On the back, 6 words were written in my father's neat handwriting. Call him. He knows everything. I sat completely still for a long time, the business card resting in my palm like a hot coal. My father was not a man who left vague messages. If he had written those words, it meant he had known there would come a day when I needed to read them. And for the first time since Vanessa had walked into the house with those cardboard boxes, I felt the fear inside me give way to something else. Suspicion. Not suspicion of myself. Suspicion of my sister's lie. 3 days later, Vanessa came back. I was in the living room practicing a few steps without my cane. The physical therapist had said I was ready to try, as long as I moved slowly, kept my back straight, and trusted my legs a little more. I held on to the back of the sofa, breathing in short, careful breaths, stepping from the edge of the rug to the coffee table. It was only a few meters, but to me it felt like crossing a suspension bridge between two deep cliffs. Then the front door flew open. Vanessa entered first, followed by Nathan carrying two large cardboard boxes. She did not knock. She did not call my name. She did not ask what I was doing. She simply looked at me, standing unsteadily in the middle of the room, then looked at the cane leaning beside the chair. A flash of irritation crossed her face as if I had staged the scene on purpose to make her feel guilty. Nathan set the boxes down near the door. Vanessa snatched one from his hands, walked over and dropped it right in front of my feet. The hollow sound of cardboard hitting the floor startled me. I lost my balance and had to grab the arm of the sofa. Pain shot along my spine, sharp and hot, but I did not cry out. I did not want to give her one more reason to call me weak. "Start packing," Vanessa said. "I want you out of here before the weekend." I looked down at the box by my feet. "I told you I need more time." "Time," she gave a quiet laugh. "Amelia, you have had 2 years. 2 years living in this house, eating our parents' food, letting them take care of you, making everyone revolve around your accident." "I was actually in an accident," I said, my voice growing hoarse. "You know that?" "Of course I know." Vanessa stepped closer. "But I also know when someone uses a tragedy to stretch pity far beyond what is necessary." Nathan said softly, "Vanessa, enough." She turned on him at once. "Stay out of this." Just then, Nora came out of the kitchen. She was the nurse who had cared for my parents during their final months. She still had a dish towel in her hand. Behind her stood Mrs. Ruth Dawson, the neighbor who had lived next door to us for more than 40 years and had brought over a casserole because she was afraid I would forget to eat. Both of them had heard everything. Vanessa either did not notice or did not care. She looked me up and down, her gaze stopping on my legs, which were still trembling slightly. "I will not let you rot here any longer," she said. "You are useless now, Amelia. Find somewhere else to die." The air seemed to drain out of the room. Nora drew in a soft breath. "Mrs. Ruth placed a hand against her chest. And I stood there, one hand clutching the sofa, feeling as though those words had stripped away the last piece of dignity I had been trying to hold on to. Then Mrs. Ruth stepped forward. "Vanessa Carter Whitman," she said, her voice old but so sharp that Vanessa had to turn around. If your mother had heard those words, they would have hurt her more than the cold ground she is lying under now. Vanessa frowned. "This has nothing to do with you." "Yes, it does, Mrs. Ruth replied. "I knew this family before you could tie your own shoes. And I know exactly who was here taking care of your parents every day." Vanessa went silent for a beat. For the first time, I saw the certainty on her face crack. If you believe a sister should never say something like that to her own flesh and blood, comment boundary. And if you are waiting to see how Amelia takes back what is rightfully hers, subscribe to the channel right now. Vanessa tightened her grip on her handbag and pulled Nathan toward the door. "By the weekend," she said, "do not test my patience." The door slammed shut. I remained standing where I was, not knowing whether I was shaking from pain, from anger, or because for the first time someone else had witnessed the truth. The next morning, Nathan came back without Vanessa. I saw his car parked in front of the gate through the curtain. He sat there for a long time, both hands on the steering wheel, his head bowed as if he were praying, but no longer knew what he believed in. When he rang the bell, I was already standing inside, one hand resting on my cane. I did not want anyone to see me stumble again. "Vanessa doesn't know I'm here," Nathan said, as soon as I opened the door. His suit was wrinkled at the elbows, his tie was crooked, and the shadows under his eyes made him look as if he had not slept in nights. The man who had always stood beside my sister in family photographs looked that morning as though the slightest touch might break him. "What do you want?" I asked. "I just want to talk." I was about to refuse. but there was something in his voice that made me step aside. Nathan entered the living room, looked at the cardboard boxes Vanessa had left behind, then turned his face away. He sat on the edge of my mother's chair, his hands clasped tightly together. "About yesterday," he began. "Vanessa should not have said that. Should not have," I repeated. "That is what you call it." He lowered his head. "I know. It was cruel." I waited. This time I did not fill the silence for someone else. Nathan swallowed. "We're in trouble, Amelia." "What kind of trouble?" "Some investments failed last year. I thought I could keep things moving for a few more months, but everything collapsed faster than I expected. There are loans, the children's tuition, the mortgage on the house in Greenwich. The bank calls every day." "How much?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "About $400,000. The number dropped between us like a stone. Suddenly I understood why Vanessa was in such a hurry. It was not because she wanted to protect the inheritance. She wanted to sell this house before the perfect life she had built was stripped of its polished surface. "So she needs the house," I said. Nathan did not answer, but his silence was enough. I looked around the living room. To Vanessa, this place was $4 million on paper. To me, it was my mother's voice, calling from the kitchen, my father's hand supporting me. On the first day I learned to stand again, the only place left that still carried the scent of the people I had lost. "Did you come here to ask me to leave willingly?" I asked. Nathan looked up, shame passing across his face. "I came to tell you that you should be prepared. When Vanessa is afraid, she will do anything." The door flew open before I could answer. Vanessa stood there, her face pale with anger. "What are you doing here?" Nathan jumped to his feet. "Vanessa, I was only—" "Get in the car!" Her voice was low and cold. "Now." Before she pulled him outside, Nathan looked back at me. His lips moved around a sentence that never became sound. I was not sure whether it was "I'm sorry" or "help me." But I knew one thing. Vanessa was not only lying to me, she was desperate. And desperate people are often more dangerous than cruel ones. That evening I brought Benjamin Whitaker's business card to the kitchen table. Outside, a fine rain was falling over Hartford. In the living room, the cardboard boxes Vanessa had left behind were still there, open-mouthed as if waiting to swallow the rest of my life. I turned the card over and read my father's 6 words again. "Call him. He knows everything." My father was not a man who liked leaving mysterious messages. If he had written that sentence, it meant he had known there would come a day when I would be pushed to this point alone after the funeral inside the very house I had once called the safest place in the world. I dialed the number before my courage could disappear. The phone rang twice. Whitaker Law Office. The man's voice was deep and steady. I gripped the phone with both hands. "Esther." "Whitaker, this is Amelia Carter. Henry and Margaret Carter's daughter." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then his voice softened. "Miss Amelia, I have been waiting for your call." That one sentence made my throat close. "My father told me to call you." "I know," he said. "Henry told me that if you called it, meant everything had happened exactly as he feared." I looked toward the living room. My cane was leaning beside the sofa, small beneath the yellow light. "Vanessa said she had spoken to you," I said. "She said all the assets belonged to her." A soft breath came through the line. "I have not spoken to Mrs. Whitman since your parents' anniversary party 3 years ago," Benjamin said. "And I have never confirmed anything of the kind." I braced one hand against the edge of the table. Relief came so quickly that my whole body trembled. "So she lied." "I would put it more carefully," he replied. "Mrs. Whitman may have seen an old paper copy, but that is not the valid will." I almost stopped breathing. "There is another one." Yes. The final version was signed 6 months ago, right after Christmas. Christmas. The family photograph without me appeared in my mind so clearly that I could almost hear the camera clicking again. Your father told me he had seen something he could no longer keep ignoring, Benjamin continued. And your mother agreed. I lifted a hand to my mouth. They knew. They knew more than you think. He paused for a moment. Aside from the will, there is also a video. Your parents requested that it be played only during the official reading of the will. The ache of missing my mother swept over me like cold wind. I wanted to ask whether she had said my name. I wanted to ask whether my father had been angry with me for staying silent that Christmas. But none of the questions could leave my mouth. Miss Amelia Benjamin said, I want you to come to my office before the will reading. There are a few things you need to know before you face your sister. I looked at the cardboard boxes on the floor. For the first time, they no longer looked like an ending. They looked like evidence. Can I come tomorrow morning? I asked. Yes, he replied. And remember this. Your parents prepared more than you realize. The next morning, before I called a taxi to take me to Benjamin's office, Nora stopped by. She stood on the porch, holding an old cloth bag. Ever since my parents died, she had looked like someone who had walked out of a house where she had left too many sighs behind. I came to return this to you, she said. She took out a brown leather notebook, its edges softened from being opened many times. I recognized my mother's handwriting at once on the page, peeking out beneath the tie. Her letters leaned slightly round, and even when she wrote in private, she still wanted everything to feel gentle. Your mother asked me to keep it, Nora said. She told me that when things became the most difficult, I should give it to you. I held the notebook against my chest. What is inside? Her final days, the things she saw, and a few pages about you and Vanessa. Nora looked out at the quiet road. I did not read it. But Margaret wanted you to understand that she was not blind. That sentence went straight through me. Not blind. For years I had thought my parents stayed silent because they did not see. Perhaps I had underestimated their love simply because they had not known how to speak at the right time. That afternoon, Vanessa held a memorial reception at an Italian restaurant in downtown Hartford. She did not ask whether I wanted to come. She only sent me a short message with the address, as if she were sending a meeting schedule to someone unimportant. When I arrived, the private room was already full. Vanessa stood at the front in an expensive black dress, holding a glass of wine, her voice soft and polished as if she had practiced it in front of a mirror. My parents spent their whole lives building this family, she said. And I promise I will protect that legacy. That legacy. This family. She spoke as if I were not standing in the doorway leaning on my cane after walking down a hallway so long that cold sweat had soaked through the back of my shirt. No one had saved me a seat at the main table. I sat down on a chair at the back of the room. A few people looked at me, then turned away. I heard Vanessa laugh when someone praised her for being strong. I heard her say the house would be handled properly and that I was transitioning into a new phase. Mrs. Ruth arrived late. The moment she saw me sitting alone, she understood. She walked straight into the middle of the room and raised her voice. Henry and Margaret would be ashamed to see their daughter treated this way. Every voice stopped. Vanessa turned around, her smile frozen on her lips. Mrs. Ruth pointed at me. Amelia cared for them every single day. She cooked for them, gave them their medicine, and sat beside Margaret when she was in pain. And Vanessa, what did you do besides send flowers and show up when someone was watching? The room fell silent. Do you think Vanessa will still be able to keep her perfect image after she walks into the lawyer's office? Comment yes or no. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to follow family stories with twists as deep as this one. Vanessa looked at me, and for the first time she no longer seemed like someone controlling the room. but I said nothing. I remembered Benjamin's words. Let her talk. Later, the silence will have a voice of its own. 3 days after the memorial reception, I walked into the Hartford Financial Building with my mother's notebook in my handbag. The elevator carried me up to the 12th floor so slowly that I could hear my own heartbeat. Every glowing number felt like one step closer to the thing Vanessa had tried to take. Benjamin Whitaker's law office was at the end of the hallway behind a frosted glass door with the firm's name engraved in silver letters. The receptionist led me into a large conference room. A long wooden table, dark leather chairs, tall windows overlooking the gray clouded city of Hartford. It was the kind of room that made people sit up straight without realizing it. Vanessa was already there. She sat at the head of the table, her leather handbag beside her like a declaration of power. Nathan sat next to her looking down at his phone, though his fingers were not really scrolling. When I sat across from her, Vanessa did not greet me. She only glanced at my cane, then looked away. "You are on time," she said. "At least you can still manage the—" I placed both hands on the table. "I am only here today to hear what Mom and Dad wanted." Vanessa gave a soft laugh. "Mom and Dad wanted everything handled neatly. That is what I am doing." The door opened before I could answer. Benjamin walked in with a woman carrying a recording device. He wore a gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed. His calmness made the room, which had been stretched tight as a wire, feel even more solemn. He placed his leather briefcase on the table, then took the middle seat. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Before I officially read the will, I need to confirm a few details." He looked up at Vanessa. "Mrs. Whitman, have you ever seen the complete final will of your parents?" Vanessa sat a little straighter. "I saw the will. It was in my mother's desk drawer." "Can you describe it?" 4 pages, she replied. Standard legal language. "The assets were left to me as the eldest daughter." Benjamin nodded slowly. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with a white cloth, a small gesture that made the room go completely still. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, "what you saw was a reference summary. It was not the final will." Vanessa's smile disappeared. "What are you talking about?" Benjamin opened his briefcase, took out a thick set of documents bound in blue paper, and placed it in the middle of the table. "This is the final legal will of Henry and Margaret Carter. 32 pages, signed in this office 6 months ago, witnessed, notarized, and filed with probate court." Nathan dropped his phone onto the table. The sound was so sharp that I flinched. Vanessa stared at the document, as if she were looking at something that could not possibly exist. "That is impossible." "I saw the other one." "The other one is not valid," Benjamin replied. "This is fraud." Vanessa's voice cracked. "You are helping her steal my inheritance." The air froze. Benjamin looked up. For the first time, his voice lost its softness. "I served as the Carter family's attorney for 22 years. I do not commit fraud. And I strongly advise you to sit down before you say anything else that may work against you." Vanessa remained standing, but only for a few seconds. Then she sat down, her face pale, her hand gripping the strap of her handbag. I looked at the blue-bound document on the table and understood that from that moment on, Vanessa no longer controlled the room. Benjamin opened the blue-bound document. In the conference room, on the 12th floor, the sound of turning pages was clearer than the rain striking the windows. Vanessa sat with her back, straight, her hand gripping the strap of her handbag. Nathan stared at the will as though he were staring at a sentence being handed down. First, Benjamin said, "I will read the section concerning Miss Vanessa Carter Whitman." There was still one last flicker of hope in her eyes. Benjamin read slowly. "To our eldest daughter, Vanessa. We leave the family investment portfolio to her transferred into an independently managed trust. Vanessa will receive an annual distribution to ensure a stable life. The remainder will be preserved for Vanessa's children when they come of age. Vanessa blinked. A trust. Nathan leaned toward the table. How much is the distribution? $50,000 a year, Benjamin replied. The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. Nathan's face went white. That amount would not save the house in Greenwich, would not cover the loans closing in around them, and certainly would not preserve the perfect image Vanessa had built. No, Vanessa said. My parents would not do that. They knew I had a family. Benjamin turned to another page. There is an explanatory letter. I do not want to hear it. I want to hear it, I said. Vanessa turned to look at me. For the first time that day, she did not look at my cane or my legs. She looked straight into my face. Perhaps she was beginning to understand that I was no longer someone who could be pushed out of this room with a few cruel words. Benjamin continued reading. We love Vanessa, but we can no longer pretend she knows how to protect money. We have witnessed too many rushed decisions, too many investments made for pride, and too many times when she treated wealth as proof of her own worth. This trust is not a punishment. It is our final protection. Vanessa's lips trembled. I did not know whether she was hurt because she had lost the money, or because for the first time our parents had seen through her. Then, Benjamin moved to the next section. As for the Carter family home in Hartford and the land surrounding it, he read we leave it in full to our youngest daughter, Amelia Margaret Carter. I forgot how to breathe. Those words fell into the room like light after a winter that had lasted too long. Vanessa shot to her feet, her chair scraping hard against the floor. That is impossible. Benjamin did not look up. This house may not be sold for 10 years. Amelia has the full right to live in it, renovate it, and use it as her primary residence. We have added this condition because the house is not merely an asset. It is the place where Amelia lost so much, but it is also the place where she helped us live our final years with dignity. My eyes blurred. I thought of my father building the ramp behind the porch. I thought of my mother placing the vase of flowers beside my hospital bed. I thought of the mornings when I made soup for her, the afternoons, when I sat with my father in the garden, both of us silent, because we both knew time was no longer generous. Benjamin read the final line. Amelia did not stay in this house because she was weak. She stayed because she loved us. If anyone tries to turn that love into shame after we are gone, we want this document to speak for us. The house belongs to her. I lowered my head. Tears fell onto the back of my hand. For the first time after years of being called a burden, I heard my parents speak in the only way they still could. Not to say that I was pitiful, but to say that I was worthy. Benjamin did not continue reading right away. He placed one hand on the will, then looked at me with a very gentle expression, as if he knew the next part was no longer about law, but about a wound being opened in front of everyone. Your parents also left a video, he said. They requested that it be played immediately after the section about the house. Vanessa's head snapped up. What video? A video you have never seen, he replied. He plugged the USB drive into the computer. The screen on the wall lit up. For the first few seconds, it showed only the familiar living room. My mother's armchair stood by the window. A gray wool blanket was draped over one side. Outside, the winter garden was bare, but pale light still slipped through the glass. Then my mother appeared. She looked thinner than I remembered, her hair much grayer, but her eyes were still as gentle as the mornings when she used to sit beside my hospital bed and read. My father stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder. He looked straight into the camera with the weary expression of a man who had spent too long thinking before finally speaking the truth. My girls, my mother began. Her voice was weak but clear. If you are watching this video, it means your father and I are no longer there to say the things we should have said long ago. Just those 2 words, my girls, were enough to make me feel like the little girl who used to run into the kitchen and wrap her arms around my mother's waist after every rainy day. My father continued, "Vanessa, you are our firstborn daughter. We love you. But love does not mean blindness. For many years, we have seen the way you treated Amelia, the times you pushed her out of conversations, the times you made her feel as though she was something shameful in this family." Vanessa did not move, but I saw her hand trembling on the table. My mother closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were red. "Amelia, you are not useless. You have never been useless. After the accident, you thought you came home because you needed us to care for you. But the truth is, you cared for us more than you know. You gave this house the sound of another person living in it. You made my painful days feel less endless. You made your father less lonely." I could no longer hold back my tears. They fell silently hot against my cheeks, but I did not wipe them away. My father tightened his hand on my mother's shoulder. "We changed the will after Christmas. After I saw Amelia being asked to step out of the family photograph, after I understood that if we did nothing one day, she would be erased from the very house she had helped keep alive." My mother looked directly into the camera. "Vanessa, if you think this is unfair, I hope one day you will be honest enough to ask why your father and I felt we had to go this far. And Amelia, this house is not a reward. It is our late apology for staying silent too long." The screen went dark. No one said a word. I heard Vanessa's quick breathing. I heard Nathan pull his chair back very softly. I heard the rain against the glass. But inside me, every sound seemed to move far away. All I could hear was my mother's sentence repeating like a hand placed over an old scar. "You are not useless." If Amelia's parents' words caught in your throat, comment "finally seen." And if this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to keep hearing stories about family boundaries and justice that arrives late. Vanessa stood up. She did not throw another accusation across the table. She did not cry out. She did not even weep aloud. She simply picked up her handbag and walked out of the conference room, like someone who had lost not only an inheritance, but the false story she had been telling about herself. I found Vanessa at the end of the hallway, standing beside the window and looking down at the city. Her shoulders were drawn inward beneath her expensive coat, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Nathan stood a few steps away with his phone pressed to his ear. I caught fragments of words like bank extension, and not today. Vanessa turned when she heard the sound of my cane touching the floor. For years, she had always looked down at me, even when we were standing at the same height. But in that moment, her gaze no longer rose above mine. It was red, panicked, and full of something I had never seen in her before. Fear. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked. "You got the house. You got Mom and Dad on your side. What else do you want?" I stopped a few steps away from her. "I want you to stop pretending you are the only victim." Vanessa laughed, but the sound broke halfway through. "You do not understand. I have children. I have a family to hold together. My house is about to be taken by the bank. Nathan ruined everything. People are going to look at me. They are going to say, I failed. So you needed our parents' house," I said. "And you needed me gone." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You do not need that much. You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You do not have anyone depending on you. That should have hurt. Maybe in the past it would have knocked me down. But after my mother's video, those words no longer had the power to cut so deeply." "You are right," I replied. "I do not have a husband. I do not have children. I do not have the kind of life you use to measure a person's worth. But I have dignity. And I will not let you step on it one more time." Vanessa looked at me as if for the first time she realized I knew how to stand upright. You told me to find somewhere else to die, I continued. I did find it. It is called home. Nathan stopped speaking on the phone. The hallway became so quiet that I could hear the elevator opening somewhere in the distance. I am not going to gloat, I said. And I will not let your children lose their home if I can help it. But my help will no longer be bought with my self-respect. Vanessa frowned. What do you want? A public apology, I said. In front of the people who heard you say I was transitioning into a new phase. In front of the people who laughed while you erased me from the family. You will say clearly what you did, and you will say that you were wrong. Her face hardened. Her old pride tried to rise back up, but it was no longer steady. If you can do that, I will lend you enough to keep your house and pay the children's tuition. No interest. With paperwork. If not, you can deal with the bank yourself. Vanessa looked at Nathan. He said nothing. His silence was like a confession that this time she had no one left to shield her. At last, Vanessa picked up her handbag. I need time. I needed time once too, I said. But you only gave me cardboard boxes. She did not answer. The elevator doors opened, swallowing her and Nathan into the cold white light. When the doors closed again, I was still standing in the hallway, one hand resting on my cane. But for the first time in a very long time, I no longer needed to lean on it just to survive. 6 months after I walked out of the lawyer's office, the house in Hartford no longer felt like a place that had once been thrown into cardboard boxes. It was still old. The wooden floors still creaked softly in the morning. The kitchen still smelled of coffee the way it had when my mother used to stand there cooking. But the air inside the house had changed. It was no longer a place where I waited to be forced out. It was a place where I woke up every day and reminded myself that I had the right to stay. I moved into my parents' bedroom at the end of the summer. On the first night, I looked out at the garden and could barely sleep. I kept expecting to hear my mother in the hallway, or my father opening the back door to check on the plants. But the house was quiet. It was a kind of silence that no longer frightened me. It felt more like space being given back to me so I could breathe. Physical therapy continued. Some days I walked almost the entire garden without my cane. Some days the pain returned, reminding me that recovery was not a straight line. But I no longer saw the weaker days as failure. I simply sat down, waited for my body to calm, then tried again. I also began taking work again, only a few small consulting projects for a landscape design company. The first time I opened a drawing, my hands trembled. I was afraid I had forgotten how to look at a piece of land and imagine what it could become. But slowly, everything returned to me. Stone paths, flower beds, a bench beneath the shade of a tree. Those small things reminded me that I could still create beauty. My first project was the backyard garden. I kept my mother's rose bushes, repaired the path my father had once left unfinished, and placed a wooden bench beside the trellis. There in the late afternoon sun, I opened the brown leather notebook Nora had given back to me. The first pages were ordinary. Then came the final pages where my mother's handwriting had grown shakier. She wrote that I thought I had returned home to be cared for, but in truth I had made the last months of her and my father's lives less lonely. Amelia is not a burden. She is the reason this house still feels warm. I closed the notebook. Tears fell, but this time they did not feel like despair. They felt like a door opening after too many years of wondering whether I was worthy of being loved. Vanessa sent me a letter after the will reading. It was not the public apology I had asked for. It was only a short letter, with several crossed-out lines. She said she was not brave enough yet to stand in front of everyone. And at the end of the letter she wrote, "I am sorry I said that sentence." I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer beside my father's business card and my mother's notebook. I had not fully forgiven her. Maybe one day I would, but I understood that boundaries are not cruelty. Sometimes boundaries are the only way to stop love from continuing to become a wound. I did not throw a party. I did not speak badly about Vanessa at every dinner table. I did not use the house to prove I was better than anyone. I simply lived. I planted the garden again. I returned to work. My name is Amelia Carter. I was once told to find somewhere else to die. But my parents left me a truth larger than a house, larger than money, larger than every word of contempt. I did not need to find somewhere else. I was already home. And this time I kept living,